Hi, and welcome to another podcast of Crossing Borders. Today we have Brenda Koesterman with Convergint Technologies with us today. Brenda, can you tell a little bit about yourself?
Hey, Stephanie. Thank you. I'd be happy to. As Stephanie mentioned, my name is Brenda Koesterman. I'm the VP of Global Accounts for Europe, Middle East, and Africa for Convergint Technologies. I've been with Convergint in this role for almost 6 years now, and previously, I've spent my entire career in the security industry, starting straight out of university at 23 years old, working for a security integrator, but spending a big portion of my career at Linnell Systems International and ASSA ABLOY on the manufacturing side. Linnell actually relocated me to Europe in 2011 to build a business development team for them across this region. And I was there for a bit with some visa changes and some things like that, and an interest in staying in the European market. I did make a change in 2013 to ASSA ABLOY, was there for a bit, and then joined the Convergint team when they entered the European market with a UK acquisition.
Great. So today we're going to talk about doing business in EMEA, or Europe, versus the US, and want to get your insights on how things are different, how you do things different in business. What are some of the things that first come to mind when I talk about things different in Europe versus the US in the security industry?
Sure. Well, obviously, I think most people can probably tell by my accent that I am American. I originally worked until 2011 in the USA in my entire career, and really didn't leave North America. I had some experience in Canada, but was very, very North American based. I came to Europe in 2011 with a bit of naivety, thinking, oh, I'll be based in the UK. I speak English. Most people in Europe, even if English isn't their first language, they speak English. It's going to be easy to communicate. Everybody will understand me. Everybody will be excited to work with me because I'm American and whatnot. I was wrong on every front. Completely wrong on every front. And so I probably spent the first 2 years that I was in the European market really just getting a handle on understanding the different cultures, how they do business, different innuendos, how to really talk with English speakers where English is not their native language, because even though their English might be really, really terrific, it can be very difficult to remember that they do have a limited vocabulary. And so if you're using big words or anything like that, often they won't understand at all what you're saying. So I ended up really adopting an approach that even today people speak to quite frequently and comment on, whereas I speak much more slowly. I have a bit of a different twang, for lack of a better term, to my accent when I'm speaking to Europeans. People comment on it all the time. It's funny. I don't do it intentionally. I think it happens as a result of really trying to be heard and really trying to be understood. And so I speak much more slowly. My accent is a little bit different. I use a much more limited vocabulary, and I've gotten a lot of feedback over the years from people in other countries that they actually really do appreciate that, because when you come in, speak very quickly, use a lot of advanced words from the English vocabulary, it can be very, very stressful and very intimidating to have a productive conversation.
Absolutely, I agree. When I moved to Europe, it was you that recruited me, and I worked with you at ASSA ABLOY in the UK, and we had numerous discussions about that. And I was going to bring up the book that you had me purchase, and
Yep.
It's a very insightful book by Richard Lewis, where it talks about the different cultures, and it's by country, and it's interesting to read about doing business in a country before you go. And then when you get back, you read it, and it is spot on. And you and I have talked about numerous times, it's not just about understanding, it's being respectful and understanding they don't understand English. Things are different. They do business differently, and respecting that and actually working that way, across all the different countries, and even in the big countries like Germany, when you have different regions within a country and how you have to do business different.
Absolutely. I love that book. It was one of the first books that I read when I started working with a lot of different cultures. And obviously, as you mentioned, I suggested it for you when you came over. It is absolutely brilliant because I think the language barrier is the first thing that we think of all of the time, and that's a very basic thing because there are so many different languages that are spoken in the EMEA market. But more importantly is really the business etiquette and how each culture has different expectations. The Dutch, for example, are very, very, very direct, very down to business. Let's just talk about it, get everything out on the table, and solve our problems. Whereas if you go into France, that's not appropriate at all. It's much more customary to spend maybe 1 or 2 hours in the coffee room having a coffee and just chatting about general life and being very sociable before you even talk about business. And maybe you're going to talk about business in a much more gentle fashion in the French market than you would in the Dutch market. And then every single culture is a little bit different. But yeah, no, Richard Lewis he's a British author. He spent a lot of time conducting business in a lot of different countries. And to your point, Stephanie, it is amazing. He is absolutely spot on with the experiences that you obviously have had and that I've had in each of these countries.
Absolutely. So part of your role at Convergent is managing global accounts, which means you have global end users. How in your role are you working with that, helping these end users find global solutions and just dealing with everyday, solutions that they're needing for their needs?
That's a great question. And obviously, we're at Convergent, we're in a unique situation because we're also still growing very rapidly. And we, comparatively to other markets that we're in globally, we still have a pretty small presence in EMEA. We only have about 260 employees across Europe, Middle East, and Africa, and they're all located in Europe. We technically have 7 CTC operations in the European market, and of course serve many more countries than that. So when we're working with global end users, and to clarify, I do a little bit of account management when it's necessary, but my role specifically at Convergent is initial business development. So I'm always working on the forefront with customers when they're making a decision about whether or not they want to do business with Convergent as a global integrator. And so I would suggest that I should probably do a proper analysis on this, but in the realm of 90 to 95% of the customers that I do work with to develop into global accounts are headquartered in the United States. So it actually tends to be a very North American focused business development effort. The reason for that simply is because we have, as Convergent, such a huge presence in North America that there's a lot of potential business to choose from there. A lot of existing relationships with organizations that are global and want global support and want one provider. We have a lot of discussions about trying to be focused on the European market and developing customers that are headquartered in the European market. That's absolutely part of my responsibility. And I do focus on that. And we do have some, I have 5 or 6 that we've successfully brought into the Convergent environment. But we also have to be sensitive to the fact that, for example, if I go into Germany, we have a small CTC in Germany. And let's say I'm talking to, BMW. We all know BMW is headquartered in Germany. And for me to walk into BMW and say, hey, do you want to do business with Convergent globally? I have 10 or less people in the entire German market that can serve your headquarters. They just kind of look at you like, no, thank you. That's okay. Now, we do have a lot of European customers where we don't have a strong presence where they're headquartered and they keep their incumbent and they do work with us everywhere else in the rest of the world. But generally speaking, it comes back to that 95% that is still getting fed through our global accounts team to develop business globally. So the reason I paraphrase all of that is because I think it's important to understand that even though I'm focused on EMEA business development, I'm still primarily working with North American customers, North American contacts. And so what ends up happening is, and without getting too much into a conversation about how insular Americans can be, I spend a lot of time helping to educate people that are US centric and sort of think inside of that US vacuum. The United States is so enormous, but it's very, very consistent from state to state. I mean, like all of the local laws are pretty similar. We all speak the same language, and it's very, very easy to move from state to state and do business. It's very, very different when you're in another global market, and it could be APAC or EMEA or even South America, right? I mean, they all deal with this because of the multiple countries. And so I end up spending a lot of time with customers, educating them and helping them understand that doing business globally is not easy. We absolutely have to take it on a country by country approach. We have to do a very specific site alignment, understand exactly how we're going to deliver in each country, understand if there's tax implications, if there's special laws that we have to be aware of, whether or not we need special account teams in certain areas. And our proposition at Convergint when we're building that is within global accounts, we've developed a process where we have a global program manager that we assign to a global account. And that person is responsible for operational execution and ensuring that the operational execution of that account is as efficient as possible and as complete as possible. And I would say 85% full stop of their responsibility is communication. Communicating with the teams, communicating with the client, communicating with subcontractors, maybe other trades, whatever the case might be. And then additionally, we build a very, very comprehensive account team around that global account as well. And that account team will frequently include 1 to 5 different account executives that are working on this account in each region. So frequently in Asia Pac, for example, we might have 3 or 4 account executives, 1 for India, 1 for Southeast Asia, 1 specifically for China, maybe 1 for the rest of the areas. EMEA will have 1 or 2 typically. North America, depending on how many locations, can have several. And so a lot of time is spent helping to educate them on how we can effectively conduct business across all of these different countries, because it is totally different than conducting business in North America. You can have 100 sites in North America and every single purchase order can come out of that company's headquarters and it can go to Convergent's headquarters, and we can conduct business everywhere, invoice, no problem, however we want across all 100 sites. When we get outside of North America, I shouldn't even say North America, when we get outside of the United States, because Canada is a separate country and we invoice separately for Canada as well, and Mexico, of course. When we get outside of the United States, every single country has its own regulations. We either have to have a registered business entity in that country, or if we don't have a registered business entity, there's going to be other VAT issues that we have to take into consideration. So every single country has its own invoicing entity, its own rules around how we can invoice, how we can reclaim VAT, so on and so forth. So a lot of time is spent helping customers understand those nuances and getting all of that set up in place at the beginning, so that when we are ready to execute projects, we don't have a bunch of obstacles to overcome.
Wow, that does sound complicated, and it can be. Which leads into another question. How do you deal with your vendors? Because you may be using some local vendors, you may be using global vendors. I mean, because that's even the backside of, of how you're delivering the products, whether it's hardware or software.
Absolutely. So generally speaking, when we engage with a global account at Convergint Technologies, we do place an expectation that they have already standardized on some kind of global system, at least for access control and video. And so from that point, we are generally dealing with one or two companies for access control and video. And those relationships for Convergint are pretty solid globally. So whether it's Genetech, Linnell, S2, of course, which is part of Linnell, any of the other products that we support. I'm sorry for all my partners that I just left out. But generally speaking, we have very, very good global relationships with those organizations, and we know who our go-to people in each region is. Most of our partners have already assigned an individual that's responsible for Convergint globally, and then that person kind of manages the relationships internally at their organization with who we need to talk to, if we're in APAC or if we're in EMEA or wherever the case might be. And so that's pretty set, and we have a very, very good procedure for that. Now, outside of those two applications, of course, you have alarm systems that typically go in that are very regionalized, different from region to region. Sometimes we're supporting fire, very regionalized. Locking hardware, really the laws around what kind of locking hardware that you can even install will be different from country to country. And so all of that is very regionalized. And we actually tend to manage that on a sort of a performance specification scenario. So we'll have a performance specification that we build into the playbook, which is managed by the global program manager, and that's co-authored with our customer. So that actual performance specification about what they want to achieve is documented. And then we take that into the region and we'll say, oh, okay, we have a site in Germany. There's a data center in Germany that's going up. Here's the performance specification. We know it's going to be Genetech, access control, and video. Here's all of the other things from a performance specification that it must meet from an alarm standpoint, from maybe an intercom system standpoint, whatever other products need to be brought in. And we leave it to the region to then bring in products that are specific to their region, meet all of the local regulations, meet the performance specification, integrate into the product that is our core enterprise product. And then, so you'll see variances from country to country based on that. And that's really, really important. We call it global reach local service at Convergint, where we're very, very good at supporting enterprise applications, enterprise implementations, enterprise program management, but everything that happens locally in region is going to be very specific to that region, and we're not going to try and shoehorn anything in.
Wow, I hope that people really understand now how complicated it can be. Like you said, from state to state, some of these countries in Europe are about the size of some individual states, and how different they can be. Not just culture-wise and language-wise, but product-wise and everything that they're going to install. Are there any other insights or information? This has been excellent information.
You know, I think the only last thing that I would say when you're working overseas that is really important from my standpoint, mistakes that I've made and that I've seen other people make, is really take a step back and set your mind to think, okay, I'm operating in a different country. I need to have zero expectation about how things operate here and just be incredibly open-minded to learning and absorbing the information that that country gives you.
I completely agree. Being open to doing things different, absorbing things, and observing before you just jump in and tell them how it's going to be done the American way we're used to doing. Thank you so much for joining. It's so insightful, and stay tuned for the next episode.